We're going to just got the recording started, and I want to welcome all of you to the second session with Susie Boss. And before you all came into the session, we were chatting a little bit about, what a difficult time the world is having at the moment. And, I think one of the great things about teaching and education is that it is all encompassing. And when we focus on the work that we're doing, it can really push a lot of other things aside. And working together with so many people in the region has, for me, been absolutely a salvation this year. And I hope in the next hour that I know we'll have another really good session with Susie, and hope it'll just help us focus on what's really, really important is providing the very best we can for the kids who are in our care. Thank all of you for joining us again. And Susie, I can't tell you how much we enjoyed last week, and I'm really looking forward to part two. And that's all you're going to hear from me this evening. I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Susie. So Susie, I think you had to get your screen back too.
I will. I'll share my screen and we'll get underway.
Enjoy.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ed, for again for the lovely those just kind of words to set the tone for tonight, reminding us just the optimism of the work that we do in education. I think that's really important for all of us at these challenging times we find ourselves in. So let me share my screen. We will get underway here. Okay, great. So welcome back. If you were with us last week, some of you may be new this time around. I know that Ed recorded this session last week, so if you missed that, there'll be a chance to review that later. And all of you should have received a packet of handouts since last week with some prompts, things to think about, and some resources for you to explore. And we'll come back around to some of those things today. So welcome to part two. As I mentioned last week, I live in Portland, Oregon, and spring is just bursting forth here. We had our first 60+ degree day here in Celsius. That would be 16 degrees. We can really feel spring underway. And for me, I'm just starting to make some plans to work with educators in other countries, which is one of my favorite things to do, and have been kind of grounded for the last couple of years, but I'm just getting ready to take a trip to South America to work with some schools in Colombia that are embracing project-based learning and really developing new visions for what students know and can do. So I'm really looking forward. That'll be a return trip for me. And I know that all of you are in interesting places at the moment. So let's see what we can learn together tonight in a session where we're going to really focus on the things that get in the way of the kinds of learning experiences we talked about last week. Last week was all about possibilities, I hope, getting you thinking about what is interdisciplinary learning all about? How does it connect to project-based learning? Why is this worth doing for your students? What are some of the motivations? And a lot of you in the comments last week, I really appreciated your thoughtfulness of the ways that you want to engage students and let them see themselves as creative problem solvers who aren't stuck in one silo or only following the teacher's instructions, but are able to think on their own and solve interesting problems that tend to be involved about more than one content area. The nature of problems tends to be complex. And so the sorts of projects I've been talking with you about and sharing examples of require that kind of complex thinking. Now, that's not easy. So today we're going to focus on barriers that can get in the way and see if we can collectively come up with some bridges to get you past those barriers and into implementation. We're going to use the Google Doc that you see a link for here, and I'll share the same link again when it's time to get into it. But we're going to use a Google Doc and some breakouts in a little while to do what I think of as a collective wisdom session, where we're going to break into smaller groups and see if we can solve some of these problems of practice together and come up with strategies that really are going to get some of those barriers out of the way and allow your students to move forward with the kind of learning experiences most of you must want, or you wouldn't be here on a Sunday morning on your free time. So let's get busy about thinking about what we can solve together. So open your chat if you would, and tell me a little bit about possibilities. Before we move to barriers and bridges, let's stay a little bit longer in this realm of opportunities and possibilities. Did the discussions last week or the materials that were in the handout, did they spark some new thinking for you about possibilities for doing interdisciplinary projects with your students? Is there an aha, an insight, or a project idea you're starting to contemplate now that we've been talking about this together and thinking about some resources? So I'm going to just be quiet for a minute and invite you to add your insights, your takeaways so far, your project ideas that might just be starting to percolate. Add those to the chat if you would, and let's just kind of see what's on, what insights you've had as you've been thinking, I hope, over the last week about some of the opportunities for your students. And if you'd rather share your thinking aloud, feel free to turn on your mic and just add a comment or two. That way is fine. Wait just a moment longer and see if we have some project ideas percolating or some new ways of thinking. Great, here we come. Kelly? Math and art standards coming together. Boy, I've seen some great projects over the years that bring mathematical thinking into art production. Great possibilities there. Bringing in data and statistics to history. Great possibility there. Katie liked the high-tech high projects. Great. Okay, fantastic. So we've got some ideas coming together. People are starting to think about the sorts of projects that they want to go and continue using the chat. I see another example here from Caroline. Very relevant topic, right, for the regions where you're living. I live, as I mentioned, in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, and projects about earthquake readiness. We are way overdue for the big one, as they tell us, in this parts of the world. But thinking about predicting and the science of predicting and impacts of social studies, terrific. Okay, all right, so I see some more thoughts coming together there, which I really appreciate. Keep those coming if you'd like to keep this chat alive and well during our session. So I appreciate the thinking that I see there so far. I also, last week, invited you to share some of your ideas about things that get in the way. What are those barriers to project-based learning? And some of you added more comments during the week, which I really appreciated. I checked back a couple times and noticed that this page got more full of good thinking as the week proceeded. So, I really appreciate that. And I've designed our breakout rooms today around your comments, around your questions, because I think it's really critical that we don't ignore what's hard about this sort of learning, that we really acknowledge those barriers. And as I've worked with schools around the world, and as I've looked at your comments, there are some common barriers that get in the way, and we just have to address these, understand them, unpack them, and see if we can overcome them if we're going to be able to proceed with this sort of project-based learning. Many teachers start with concerns about their content, that their curriculum is really full, or maybe they teach an IB course and they're just really focused on covering that content, and they feel like, I don't have any room here, I don't have any breathing room to do a project. Planning time for teachers is a big concern. A couple of you on your the Padlet mentioned needing to develop buy-in from some of your colleagues, or actually mentioning resistors, teachers who are resistant to this rather than allies as you develop project plans. So there are lots of barriers that can get in the way. And we're going to focus on those directly. But what I want us to anticipate, once we kind of unpack our own barriers and our own context in our discussion groups, start thinking about strategies, resources that you might need, or strategies that can help you move forward so you get over those barriers and you aren't stuck in this place of, oh, I'd like to do this, but I can't, or I can't do it because. Instead, let's think about how might you be able to do the sorts of projects you want to do and that your students really deserve. And I'm going to share with you, before we go into some breakouts and look at some more resources, I want to share with you a few strategies I've seen used effectively. And I like to think of these as game-changing strategies because they've often led to more great project experiences for students down the road. I worked over the last few years and will be continuing to work this later this year, starting in the new school year in the fall, with AIS Chennai. And in this school, there was a real desire among the leadership and among teachers to do more project-based learning, but teachers were feeling that sense of, we don't have planning time for this. We're not sure quite how to go about it. We have this, curriculum that we're already following. There's no time for this, and there's no time particularly to connect anything across content areas. And so the leadership team committed to a week-long immersive project for every student at the elementary levels, where they took away all expectations that students were going to be deeply invested in their regular classes. And instead, teachers had the opportunity to have time in their planning agendas and their planning schedules to work with their instructional coach, and in some cases to work with me on designing projects that related to the school vision. So instead of relating directly to content goals, this related to those vision words that all of us have in our school cultures. In Chennai, they were around things like empathy and innovation and global citizenship. I'm sure your school has a vision statement with similar focus, but Chennai decided to really lean into this vision and see how they could design projects around different aspects of the vision that really brought it to life, and give teachers the time they needed to plan and implement these projects with their colleagues. So colleagues teamed up based on interest in particular project topics rather than their grade level or content area. And they got to do this really nice mixing of strategies, working with colleagues they hadn't worked with before. The young lady you see on the left here was doing a project about redesigning a courtyard in the school. How could we redesign this to make it a more interesting place for learning? And she was coming up with some prototypes and ideas that she's presenting to school staff. The folks on the bottom right, the muralists, are working on a project on how art affects our mood and the emotional aspects, makes us feel better around wellness. And so they're working on a mural that's going to really enliven the school. The ones at the top were focused on storytelling and connecting with local culture. Who are interesting people that we want to know more about in our community, and how do we tell their stories? And you see this young man gathering some video footage that they're going to edit into a really nice documentary. So this has now become a tradition, so that twice a year they now have a vision week where regular class assignments get interrupted and students have this opportunity to work on really interesting projects with teachers who are teaming up in different ways. And it's created that space for teachers to plan and to get comfortable with project-based learning in some different contexts. It just wasn't going to happen without some sort of a catalyst to get teachers moving in this direction, with the goal that these sorts of projects will trickle back into the regular content areas now that teachers have had a chance to kind of get their feet wet and to plan together and to plan with some support. But it did take a commitment by the leadership team to say, this is time we want to, how we want to spend some time. This is important to creating the learning experiences we want. But that's what I consider a game changer. A very similar strategy I saw used in the American School of Bombay, ASB, with a tradition now that's come to be known as Studio 6, where once again, the goal was to give teachers some room to think about project-based learning in a way that wasn't stressful, that didn't feel like it was taking away from their regular teaching or adding on to their regular teaching. So in this case, to prototype Studio 6 projects, which happen again over a solid week of learning, they brought in some partners, some learning partners to design the projects. And the partners were experts in things like robotics and filmmaking and documentary studies, things like that, photography. So the teachers didn't have to be experts in the content. The teacher's expertise came into play in terms of the learning experience. How do we make sure that we're helping students be successful as learners? How are we checking in and doing formative assessment along the way? How are we connecting what they're doing to our standards, using some of the resources the school had around making and design thinking and building students' 21st century skills? So this, again, was an investment by the leadership in thinking differently about how do we create space for teachers to get comfortable with project-based learning without overtaxing them and overburdening them, and doing it in a way that's cross-curricular. That's become a tradition, so that students have regular experiences in these really engaging Studio 6 projects. They get them out of their content silos and into really immersive projects that cut across curriculum. That's what I consider kind of a game changer, because teachers got the chance to see the benefits. They got a chance to be a little bit on the sideline. They didn't have to be the content expert. They had a great partner to be the content expert, but they got to really see, how does project-based learning unfold? How do I get comfortable with this? And how do I get my students comfortable with this? A couple more strategies, and then we're going to get your thinking underway. A lot of great projects that require disciplinary thinking work best when you bring in an outside partner, someone who does this work for a living. It helps you as a teacher, because you don't have to be the expert in absolutely everything in a particular discipline or enterprise or nonprofit issue that perhaps your students want to wrestle with. You can bring in experts, as we talked about last week, either for the whole project planning or just in time to help with a particular aspect of the project. But to make this more systematic and less of a, oh gosh, I'm going to try to go find an expert on my own as a teacher, and that's really hard to do, to create systems where potential partners know what the school is up to, know that it's doing these sorts of interesting real world projects, and that there are ways they can help. They can engage with your students, maybe bring students into projects that their business or their nonprofit is working with, where they would really benefit from some student insights, or students as potential partners, or maybe they're going to be content experts in particular ways. So giving your possible partners an insight into, this is the kind of teaching and learning we're doing. These are the needs we have coming up over the next few months for possible partners, and give them a kind of a menu of options for engaging with your school. This could start with your parent community. These are adults in probably a lot of highly skilled professions who have a lot of expertise. You might start with them as potential partners, and then invite them to connect with their networks. Who are they working with? Who are their business colleagues and partners who might enjoy working with students in a similar way? I've seen lots of examples of schools that really find partners who want to kind of grow the future pipeline. This might be a little different in international schools, but in the US, we're seeing a lot of kind of regional partnerships where perhaps it's an industry that really wants to grow its future employee pipeline in that region, around manufacturing or logistics or agriculture or technology. And so they're partnering with schools and offering their own expertise because it's to their benefit. They're getting students interested in the fields that they want to see more students gravitate to in the future. But the other piece of this strategy that I think is a really key to making it truly game-changing is to help these experts get ready to work with kids. They aren't necessarily experts in coaching and mentoring young students, young learners. You are as a teacher. That's your area of expertise. I've seen very accomplished adults who are coming in to be a mentor on a project or answer students' question on a project. And I mean, I've seen them just quaking before going into classrooms because they aren't sure they know how to work with middle schoolers. They're kind of afraid they're going to get eaten alive by a classroom of 13-year-olds or 12-year-olds. So you might need to prepare them. Here are some ways to talk with students. Here are the sorts of questions they're wondering about. They might need a little coaching on how they can be really effective partners for your students. But I think once you get those relationships going, you tend to get repeat visits by the same partners because they see the value for your students and it's enjoyable for them. They get to talk about the work that they do with young people who are really interested. And a third one is to really pay attention to student voice. I think students can sometimes push us toward learning opportunities that we might not have been ready for. This young lady is the sort of student who shows up to school because she loves theater. That's what just lights her up, and that's what she lives for. So picture her in a science classroom where she's not so interested in science until she realizes she could use the science labs and the science lessons she's doing to create really awesome theater masks for an upcoming production, because they're needing to learn about material science and how you can create, different properties by combining materials and using heat and different ways to manipulate materials. So she's able to show what she knows through a really high interest product for her. She's still learning all the science that her teacher wants her to know, but her own suggestion about what she wants to produce is very different from what the teacher might have imagined, because he's not a theater guy. It hadn't occurred to him that you could learn about science by producing theater masks. So she's doing all the great learning that she needs to do, but toward a purpose and toward a product that's really interesting and motivating to her. So listen to your students when they come up with what might seem like wild ideas for directions they want to go with a project. If you can see how their ideas align with the learning goals, the things that they really need to learn, but still give them some room to make choices and come up with maybe some surprising products. I think you're going to, again, find yourself in that game-changing territory. So what I want to do for a good chunk of our time together today is to have us go into some breakout groups. And I use this Google Doc that I've created for you. Let me just kind of talk through what we're going to do in the breakout groups and the choices that are available for you. So I'm going to create 5 rooms. You'll see just 4 choices here, but I'm going to explain in a minute why there will be 5. We'll have 5 breakout rooms. The first one is going to really focus on those questions teachers raised and barriers that they raised around planning. How are we going to create time for this? How are we going to make connections outside of our content silos where we feel like we get stuck or we don't know how to make those connections? This is about teacher planning. How are you going to overcome some of those barriers and set yourselves up to be more effective with planning the kind of projects you want to get to? The second one is more about implementation. How are you using class time effectively? If you're in a situation like one of our participants brought up last week, someone I believe who's in Hong Kong where learning has shifted to totally virtual learning, can you do projects in a blended or online context? And for each of these topics, when you get to the Google Doc, you'll see some resources that you might want to look at. There are some great resources there around blended and online projects that will help you maybe shape your thinking and start to come up with some strategies. Room 3 is going to be all about impact. Some of you raised questions about how do we make the project or the challenge the right size so students aren't overwhelmed by some massive issue like climate change where they feel like, gosh, there's nothing I can do, or animal rights that have to do with animals, far, far away from where your students live. How do we know if they can really make a difference? So that's all about the impact of projects. And the fourth one has to do with school culture. If you have colleagues who are kind of resistant to project-based learning, if you feel like there's not buy-in, that this is going to be a hard sell in your school context, or there's systemic barriers that get in the way, that's what breakout room number 4 is going to focus on. So these are your 4 choices. I'll create the breakouts in just a moment. And number 5, room 5 is kind of the everything else. If there's a topic that you don't see here that you want to talk about, go to room 5 and bring up additional questions or issues that you want to discuss with your colleagues. Room 5 would be a great place, breakout room 5, if you want to test out a project idea. Maybe you're starting to percolate an idea and you'd like a little bit of feedback. Or maybe you're looking for someone to potentially collaborate with. Again, that's the kind of open-endedness of room 5. What I would like you to do when you get into your breakout rooms, choose your own adventure here based on which room most appeals to you. Open the Google Doc, take a look at that together, and then spend a bit of time unpacking your barriers. Be real, acknowledge what is it that you think might be holding you back or your colleagues back, and then see if you can start to work towards some strategies. What I'd like to do is use this Google Doc as a place to capture the collective wisdom of this smart group of folks. So if you come up with some ideas in your conversation that you think might help others, add that to the right column. Right-hand column is wide open for your ideas right now. And then when we come back from the breakouts, be ready to share out, at least have one person from each room, be ready to share out an aha or a takeaway or a strategy that you think everybody ought to hear, that it's really worth kind of moving things forward with the strategy you've come up with. It might benefit your colleagues. So before I create the breakouts, are there any immediate questions about what's ahead? What the task is? Okay, I'm looking for my breakout rooms. I'm going to just talk myself through this. We're going to create 5 rooms, and you're going to choose which room you want to go to. So they're numbered, numbers 1 through 5, matching the screen here, and you're going to choose your room. The Google Doc should be shareable. It's totally open and editable by anybody on the web. If that's not true, please let me know. Okay, so the link is at the top of the screen right now. It's tinyurl/IRCOS-wisdom. Okay, and I will send it out to you in the chat as well. Any other questions before we move to breakouts? I'm gonna, when you go to your breakout rooms, I will actually send the link to your rooms again, so you make sure that you have all those. In terms of time, I'll check back with you in about, oh, there's the full link, thank you. I'll check back with you in about 10 minutes and see how your conversations are going, and then remind you that you're gonna need to add your thoughts to the doc and have somebody ready to share out when we regroup. Okay, so I'm gonna create the rooms and let you choose where you wanna go. Okay, choose your own adventure.
Right. Did you get any? Did you share any link for joining in the room? I didn't get.
You should have choices on the screen in front of you. Tell me your name and which room do you want to be in?
Planning.
Planning. Okay. And you are Eddie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to put you in room number 1. Okay. Should get a link now.
Okay.
Got it? There we go. Anybody else have trouble joining, and I can just send you in a room of your choice? It's like most of you are moving. Okay, it looks like we've got some folks at least in every room. If you're still waiting to join a room or if you want some help, let me know. Just turn on your mic and let me know what's holding you back. Yes, Winnie, go ahead. Can you turn your mic on?
Susie, I was wondering to talk about like assessment for like project-based learning.
Ah, okay, sure.
So
We
which
can,
room should I go to?
it's really more about planning. So why don't you try room 1, planning for assessment, and just be sure you bring that up as the focus that you want to focus on in terms of planning, okay?
Sure, thank you.
Yep. Anybody else stuck on their choices? Michelle, go ahead.
Hello, Susie. Could you put me into room 3, impact?
Room 3,
Is
you
that
bet.
the room? Thank you.
Okay,
Impact.
great.
Hi, Susie. Could you drop me in room 2, please?
And this was Patrick?
Yes, this is Patrick. Thank you.
Gotcha. You bet. Okay. Anyone else? Miss Jenny, you look like you're still unassigned. Do you need to be, need me to move you to a room or can you join one? Okay, looks like she's joined. Okay. Sophie, it looks like you're just joining us. We are just going into breakout rooms. If you want to turn your mic out, I can tell you what your choices are, or we can just chat here in the main room if you prefer. Okay, folks are coming back. Couple more minutes here and everyone will be back. Final seconds. Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. Boy, based on what I see in the Google Doc, there were some lively conversations happening there. A lot of good thinking underway. What I'd like us to do is just do a whip around and have one person from each of the breakout rooms share a little bit of your a strategy, an aha, something that was really worth sharing from your conversations. So let's start with room one around planning. Teacher planning time. What did you come up with in terms of strategies to help alleviate the planning barriers? And whoever wants to speak for room one, go right ahead.
I can do it. So just some strategies we noted down is that you need to be flexible within your project, realizing you'll need to adjust as you go, depending on student needs. That collaboration is really important. By sharing the planning, you can create something. And even if it's not great at first, you can continue to adapt it or improve it over time. The alternative to that is if you don't have buy-in from another teacher, to just go ahead and create something yourself anyway. And hopefully once you've got a successful project in place, you can encourage others to join you and to add to your existing project. And we also had a couple of people that had some really specific tools they use, like creating flow charts to make the process clearer to students and also help with their own planning. And then just some challenges that when you give student choice, especially for younger choices, it does need to be a little bit more guided because they don't always know what to do with those choices. So having some suggestions available and allowing for them to choose within that framework is sometimes more useful. And then the last kind of challenge we noted is that sometimes it's difficult when you've got a project that's going in different directions to have a common way to assess that.
Okay, great. Okay, so sounds like a rich discussion. You'll notice in each of these topic areas, there are also some resources you might want to explore later. If you probably didn't have time to get into those too much now, but they might help answer some of those challenges or address some of those challenges. But it sounds like there was some good thinking in group one around planning. I like what I'm hearing there. How about group two, class time, implementation, blended and online? What did we learn together in room two?
All right, I can share that. I was the
Great.
Designated note taker. So
Great, Greg. Let's hear it.
Basically, everybody shared maybe the common theme was around making these projects really purposeful and connected to the whole school so that everyone was under the same purpose, really. Like maybe if it was a full week that we were just dropping the entire curriculum coverage, ideas like that, or making specific planning time at the start of the year and then checking on your progress for the projects that are ongoing throughout the year, but make sure that they're talked about throughout the week, for each week throughout the year, making, design thinking challenges, collaborating with upper and lower grades. Let's see, having these like time given to kids to explore, like the genius hour type idea. Let's see, what's some other things? Yeah, trying to just start kind of small and, like with have one done in one semester, one done in the second semester. And I think there was a lot of, at the end, we started talking about, there was a comment made about balance and well-being. So it's not just we're over consumed in this one thing, that the wellness of the teachers and students is also considered.
Yeah. And as you're doing that sort of planning across your school, as you said, making it really buy-in, system-wide, thinking about kind of what are the key times when kids are going to be in different, have different expectations for projects. So it's not all landing at once. So they don't have, 5 final presentations to prepare for in the same week, which can be taxing, overtaxing for everybody. So having a little bit of coordination, across content areas can be really helpful too. Okay, some great strategies, it sounds like, around implementation. How about impact, difference making? Room 3, what did we learn from your conversation?
I can speak for room 3.
Great.
When we thought about some barriers for the meaningful impact for projects, we were thinking about when the projects are summatively assessed and students are very vigilant and focused on their grades, that can be a kind of conflict for them to actually take action. They want to do what will score well rather than something that is maybe perhaps more meaningful. We didn't get a chance to talk about more global issues within a local context. But when we were thinking about how to help students advocate and really try for that application, we wanted to make sure that the project isn't too complex. So that way the students are able to get a full deep understanding rather than kind of a partial lens on the topic.
Yeah.
And we were just curious about how to create more time for students to see stages through with a mentor or expert. In my current practice, we're looking at experts for one session or one day, and it's not kind of part of a continual process. They're not able to come back in and really give feedback. So we were wondering about how we can help students see things through.
Yeah. And, your virtual tools, Zoom and Google Meet can be ways to just have those touch points or check-ins with experts too, if they can't physically return or come back, or if you're doing blended or online learning and students can't be in the same location with them. That can help and keep that conversation going. Great. Sounds like some good ideas came out of room 3. And then room 4, it looks like Sherry is being volunteered. Are you okay with that, Sherry? Speaking for room 4 about school culture and overcoming resistance.
Yes, hi. I just found out that it's quite difficult for our teachers to work together. And after this, from the other chair rooms sharing about, because I'm a head of the math department, but the other roommate is from the coordinator, for the academic coordinator. And after sharing from her thoughts, and I kind of learned a lot. So I think for some teachers that we were working together, it's really good to let the teachers who are patient about to design the PBL to work first together. And for other teachers, they are not too sure how to start with, or maybe have not open-minded enough. So they can follow the teachers who have already designed some PBL and to teach them or to share their thoughts with other teachers who are not familiar with this. So we can have a quite good beginning to cooperate together.
Yeah, really. It's one of those great innovation strategies, is to find your early adopters. Who are the ones who are most interested in doing this? Support them with the resources they might need. If you have instructional coaches or some extra planning time, make sure they have what they need. And then, encourage them to open up their classroom doors, invite other teachers in, particularly at times when they're going to hear students talking about their learning. So at a showcase event, it's not just a share and tell, it's really a chance for students to unpack their learning. How did I grow through this project? What challenges did I have to overcome? What did I struggle with? And how do I know if I made a difference? I think when teachers hear students talk through some of those sorts of questions in a final showcase, they get pretty excited about where a project might lead. That can overcome some of that resistance that, oh, this just sounds like it's going to be frivolous or fun or maybe engaging, but we've got serious stuff to study over in our department. That might help change the conversation a little bit when teachers start to see what students really know and can do as a result of these projects. So the Google Doc, that'll stay available for you. It's not going to come down after today. And if you were in one room and really curious about the conversation in another, there's some great notes and strategies there. And then you'll also find some resources on the left-hand column that might be worth your while to investigate, going forward as you take this forward. So as we're kind of wrapping up today, I wanted to just close with a few strategies that I hope will help you as you go forward, just kind of based on my own PBL experience, whether it's interdisciplinary or single subject. And one is, don't be afraid to set some constraints or boundaries around a project. You're not ruining the spirit of project-based learning if you limit students to a particular type of product or a choice of 2 or 3 different things that they investigate. If we think of the world outside of school, most projects have constraints. They have budgets, they have timelines. If you're an engineer, you don't just get to build any old bridge, any old place. You have particular constraints that you have to design within. And so it's just perfectly fine for projects to also have constraints for your students. It doesn't take away from the authenticity. And in fact, in many cases, it adds to it, because it's the way that experts in the world also have to solve challenges within certain limitations and constraints. So look for ways to make your projects small enough for kids to kind of get their arms around, not so big and unwieldy that they feel like they'll never be able to make a difference, with this question. So I like to talk about projects being big enough to matter, but small enough to tackle. Another one is to really focus on this authenticity piece. Even if you're just in a single subject area and you don't yet have any potential partners or opportunities to do interdisciplinary projects or connect across disciplines, think about your own field of study, your own discipline, and how can you make the project as authentic as possible within that discipline? This is something I've tried to really dig into a lot to understand authenticity, because we know it's something that makes for good projects, but it can seem kind of amorphous. How do, teachers will talk about, well, I want it to be real world, or I want it to be authentic. Well, what does that really mean when you're planning the project? And some of the research I've explored looks at 3 really key considerations, and I've kind of translated those into some easy to remember mnemonics for us. The first one is around construction of knowledge, that experts in authentic ways learn things in order to solve complex problems. They understand, they investigate, they research, they organize their thinking in order to solve complex problems. So think about the problem. Is the problem itself authentic that your students are tackling? That's one kind of layer of authenticity. And then as they dig into this problem, are they using the kind of lenses of whatever discipline you're teaching in? If you're a mathematician, a math teacher, are you teaching them to think about mathematics in the way that experts do? Whether it's pure math or whether it's applied math like statistics, are they using all the tools and techniques that people in the field of mathematics use to solve problems and to communicate their thinking? So really disciplined inquiry in your field, the content area that you're most comfortable teaching. And this gets you into the process. That's that second P. So the problem's authentic, and so is the process that students are going to. The way they ask questions, the kinds of questions they ask, the way they look for evidence, all of that needs to be authentic to the discipline that you're working in. And that's going to help them really kind of step into these authentic roles. I'm no longer a student studying geometry in the abstract. I'm now an architect using my understanding of angles and area and perimeter to design something, to design a built environment of some sort on your campus maybe, or for a client, or something that needs remodeling. The third one that I want you to remember is that authentic work has value beyond school. So it matters, it has an impact. It's not just being turned in for a grade. It also has personal meaning, relevance to students. So this is the impact, of the work that students are doing. It's the product that they produce is evidence of what they learned, but it also makes a difference. It also matters to them and to the wider world. So these 3 Ps can kind of help you think through the authenticity of your projects as you're designing them. Ask yourself, is the problem authentic? Am I putting students through the same process that the experts use? And is the product something that really is going to matter to them in the wider world? I find that when teachers keep these kind of authentic lenses in mind, they design better projects. They design projects that are more like what happens in the world outside of school when it comes to problem solving. And even if you're only focused on one content area, you're going to help students really develop that disciplinary learning. There might be future occasions where they will need to use that same kind of thinking skill in connection with another content area. But at the minimum, they're really learning to think deeply in one discipline, and that's going to help you as you look for ways to connect across other disciplines. One more tip for you. We know that most projects in some way are communicated to an audience. So one of the suggestions I have for you is to really be critical about what that showcase to an audience looks like, how you structure it. What do students want from an audience? Again, it's not a show and tell kind of situation. They don't just want applause if they've done a really rigorous, interesting, impactful project. They want to make a difference. They want to get some kind of response. It may be that they've come up with a great technology solution or a new product, and they want some technical feedback on it from the sorts of people who look at pitch sessions and do Shark Tank events, with potential folks they're going to invest in. It may be that the response they want is some kind of action. So I've seen students, educating voters about different ballot measures or things that they feel like their audience needs to be more focused on, whether it's around wellness or whether it's around their how they're responding to COVID or whether they're getting vaccinated. They want a response. They want to see that the work they've done has moved people to take action. Or it may be that what they're looking for is a way to celebrate particular people in their community. I've seen some great projects telling the stories of kind of the unsung heroes or the people who really make life work in different communities or even on our school campus. Who are all the people who kind of make schools function? I've seen some great storytelling examples that get into telling the stories of different community members. And what students want after projects like that, at the end of projects like that, is to celebrate the people that they've showcased in their stories or in their investigations. And keep in mind, what does audience look like if your students were experts out in the field doing something similar? If they're making documentaries, think about a red carpet night. If they're acting as historians and creating exhibits or living history experiences, think about how historians get their work out into the world. So each of the disciplines that you're connected to has a way that people in that field naturally connect with their audiences. They have ways that they get their ideas out to the world. Scientists and mathematicians have their own practices about contributing to journals or testifying before policymakers or becoming advocates and speaking out on particular issues with evidence. So think about the student version of those expert opportunities. And of course, think about technology can be your connector. So students don't miss out on the chance to connect with audiences if you're in a virtual learning environment. I've seen some wonderful projects unfold totally virtually, and the showcase at the end, the sharing of student learning, it happens in a live streamed way or on a Zoom call, and they still get that interaction with audience where they're not just, here's what I did, kind of a demonstration, but we're having an engagement with our audience. We're having a conversation with them. They're asking us questions, and we're explaining our thinking and defending our evidence and all those things that really help students kind of take full advantage of this learning opportunity. So those are just a few PBL tips that I wanted to share with you. And coming back to where we began a week ago, I talked about, this is a project-based world. And when teachers think about what they want students to know and be able to do by the time they graduate, they often mention non-academic qualities and competencies, things like collaboration and curiosity and creativity. So as you're designing projects, don't forget about these. They can be part and parcel of your, just embedded in your project planning right alongside your academic learning goals. Some schools think of these as ATLs. What are they? Attitudes toward learning. In some schools will use that language. Others will talk about soft skills or 21st century skills. But these are the skills your students are going to need now and in the future when they encounter challenges, when they run into problems. These are the strengths that are going to help them move forward. So help them think about in the project how they're developing these skills, and do some intentional teaching to whatever competencies you think are really critical for a particular project. Don't just assume that students will know how to collaborate because you've put them in project teams. They may need some of your instruction, your scaffolds, to help them be really effective collaborators and communicators, and all the rest. I had a conversation the other day with an educator in a school that's doing a lot of work with external partners, with business and community partners. And they're thinking about what sorts of projects can our students do that they use the language are going to be resume worthy. So these are high school students. What would they put on their resume or in a portfolio that really wanted to kind of showcase, here's who I am as a learner, here's something I did, problem I tackled, or a challenge I took on that really showcases who I am as a learner and what I learned from these sorts of experiences. It's a different way to think about what are we going to get out of projects. You know, it goes well beyond test scores to how do you tell the story of a learner through the experiences that they're having and the reflections on those learning experiences. So those were a few things. I wanted to remind you a couple points from last week. Keep your focus on both the thinking part and the doing part. That it's that connection of both, going deep in your discipline, connecting across disciplines, and doing something with what you're learning, what your students are learning. I hope this continuum is helpful for you. Something I'm just introducing to educators, and I would love any feedback from you on how this might be useful. And I'm going to close with a reflection prompt for you all in just a moment. But first, I wanted to share with you the sorts of comments I collect from teachers when I talk with them at the end of a project. It may have been really challenging. They may have had a lot of bumps along the way that they had to overcome. But by the end of the project, if they stick with it, these are the sorts of things that they say. And I think these really can be bridges as well, how this kind of learning really lifts you up as a teacher and reminds you of why you're doing this work, what it's all about. I wanted to just share these for inspiration. And then I wanted to encourage one more chat, if you would, either in the chat or feel free to raise a hand or turn on your mic. It's really asking yourself to reflect on, is there a game-changing strategy that will help you move forward with project-based learning? We've talked about lots of them today, but is there something that you could do as a next step, something you want to take back to your own classroom, to your own school context that you really think might start to open up more opportunities like this? Feel free to raise a hand or turn on your mic if you'd like to talk about this, or just use the chat to share your reflections, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I do see a question that I'm going to refer to Ed about whether there's a certificate for this session. He's the expert on things like certificates, so I'm going to defer to him and he'll answer that at the end. But I really appreciate you taking your time on a Saturday morning for most of you to show up and to invest your own thinking here. I'm going to just be quiet if I can. It's hard for me. And take a moment to enjoy your reflection. So thank you so much for participating. I'll share my contact information on the next slide here. Make sure you've got your prompt here is around what's a strategy that's going to help you move forward. And here's my contact information. If you have questions or you're looking for resources and can't find them, feel free to reach out to me. I'm just committed to seeing more students get to have these kinds of experiences. So I'm going to just sit here for another moment and be quiet and take a look at some of these wonderful reflections and next steps that make me excited about what's ahead for your students. So thank you all for participating so fully today and in sharing your thinking.
Susie, before people depart, let me thank you again on behalf of your host for your time. What a wonderful teacher you are. And I'm so glad we were able to find you and that you've joined us. And I just want to thank everybody who participated this evening or this morning, sorry. And
Yeah.
look forward to seeing all of you again. But Susie, well done. Wonderful session again. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.